The first gunshot cracked across the loading dock before Rosa Alvarez even dropped the laundry cart she'd been hauling. She didn't think so. She grabbed the nearest guest, a quiet, generous tipping regular she recognized only by his unhurried politeness, never his name, and hauled him behind a parked delivery truck as a second shot. Then a third tore through the alley behind the Ashford Hotel. "Stay down," she said, pressing her whole body against his, shielding him with nothing but her own weight and the truck's thin metal panel between them and whoever was firing. Bullets punched into the truck's side, close enough that Rosa felt the vibration through her spine. The man beneath her went rigid, breathing hard, and somewhere beyond the alley's mouth she heard shouting chaos, the screech of tires peeling away. Then silence. Rosa stayed frozen a full 10 seconds after the shooting stopped, her heart slamming against her ribs, before she finally eased back enough to look at the man she'd just thrown herself over. "Are you hurt?" she asked, hands shaking as she checked him for blood. "No," he said, staring at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't recognize. "You're not hurt." "I don't think so." Rosa's own voice sounded distant to her ears, adrenaline and shock tangled together. Hotel security flooded the loading dock moments later. Far too late, Rosa noted distantly, to have done anything useful during the actual shooting, and it was only watching their scattered, panicked reaction to the man beside her that Rosa began to understand exactly who she'd thrown herself in front of. "Mr. Rinaldi," one of the guards said, breathless. Your details scattered when the first shots hit. We lost visual." Rosa's stomach dropped. Enzo Rinaldi. She'd served this man drinks a dozen times over the past year, always polite, always generous, never once causing the kind of trouble that would have told her exactly how much danger surrounded him. "You didn't know who I was," Enzo said, still staring at her with something between disbelief and raw, unguarded gratitude. "You just moved." "I saw gunfire and grabbed the nearest person," Rosa said, honest even through her shock. "I didn't think about who you were." "That's exactly what I mean," Enzo said quietly. Police arrived within minutes. The alley transformed into a crime scene, Rosa's statement taken alongside Enzo's own careful, controlled account. By the time the questioning finished, well past midnight, Rosa was exhausted, adrenaline long since curdled into bone-deep fatigue. "I want to see you home safely," Enzo said, his composed authority fully reasserted despite everything that had just happened. "Personally." "That's not necessary," Rosa said, though her voice carried less conviction than she wanted. "I insist," Enzo said. "You risked your life for a stranger tonight. The least I can do is make sure you get home safely." Rosa studied him, controlled, careful, radiating an authority that made the exhausted hotel staff around them visibly nervous, and understood with sudden unease that whatever she'd just stepped into by instinctively shielding a stranger from bullets, it was far from finished. She had no idea that by morning, everything about her careful, exhausted, ordinary life would be permanently, irreversibly changed. Rosa Alvarez was 26 years old, and the small apartment she shared with her recovering father in New Orleans's Bywater neighborhood represented the entire fragile structure of a life built on exhausting, careful survival. She worked as a housekeeper and laundry attendant at the Ashford Hotel, a job that paid poorly but reliably, 6 days a week, often double shifts when the hotel's occupancy demanded it. Her financial pressure was constant and severe. Her father, a former dockworker, had undergone emergency surgery 8 weeks earlier after a workplace injury, and between his recovery costs and the income he could no longer earn, Rosa carried the entire weight of their household alone. Her personal goal, held close and rarely voiced aloud, was simply to get her father fully healed and back on stable footing, not toward some larger ambition of her own, but toward the specific, modest hope of one day not having to calculate every dollar with the exhausting precision she'd maintained since his injury. Her emotional wound ran deep and specific. Her mother had died when Rosa was 19, leaving her father as the only family she had left, and the 8 weeks of his surgical recovery had terrified her in a way she hadn't fully processed. The specific, suffocating fear of losing the last person tying her to any sense of home. She'd promised herself, sitting beside his hospital bed in the days after his surgery, that she would protect what family she had left with everything she had, without hesitation, without calculation. Her moral boundary was simple and unbending. She did not let fear stop her from acting when someone needed help, regardless of the personal cost, because she'd learned, watching her father's slow recovery, Exactly how quickly hesitation could cost you everything that mattered. Her practical skill, honed through a year of managing the hotel's laundry and housekeeping logistics, was a sharp, detailed memory for schedules, deliveries, and the countless small logistical patterns that kept a large hotel running, the kind of unglamorous competence nobody specifically trained her for, but that she'd absorbed through sheer attentiveness to her job. The recurring object she carried, tucked into her uniform pocket every shift, was a small street Christopher medal that had belonged to her mother, worn smooth from years of handling, kept close as a private source of steadiness on the hardest days. The week before the shooting, Rosa had used nearly her entire tip earnings to cover a portion of her father's medication costs that their insurance hadn't fully covered, going without her own groceries for 3 days rather than let him go without the pain management he needed during recovery. Nobody had asked her to make that sacrifice. She'd made it because watching her father suffer unnecessarily, when she had any power at all to prevent it, felt like exactly the kind of failure she refused to allow herself. That same instinct, protective, immediate, entirely without calculation, was exactly what sent her throwing herself over a stranger's body the moment gunfire erupted across the loading dock. Riding home in Enzo Rinaldi's car that night, exhausted and still trembling slightly from adrenaline, Rosa found herself unable to fully process the strange, dissonant reality of the evening. A man whose name apparently commanded fear and deference throughout the hotel, sitting quietly beside her, treating her with a careful, genuine gratitude she wasn't accustomed to receiving from anyone, let alone someone with that much power. "I need to check on my father," she said as the car approached her building. "He's still recovering from surgery. I try not to be out too late." "Of course," Enzo said. "Is he all right being alone tonight?" "He has a neighbor checking in," Rosa said. "It's not ideal, but it's what we can manage." Something shifted behind Enzo's composed expression. Genuine concern, unexpected and unguarded. "If you need anything for his recovery, please tell me. I mean that seriously, not as an empty gesture." "I don't need anything," Rosa said automatically, though exhaustion made the automatic refusal feel thinner than usual. "I just need to get home." He walked her to her building's door personally, waited until she was safely inside and left without pressing further, though Rosa stood in her small apartment's entryway for a long moment afterward, unsettled by how much his simple, careful attention had affected her. She had no idea yet that the danger from that alley wasn't finished, or how completely her father's fragile recovery was about to become entangled with a world of danger she'd never asked to enter. Enzo returned to Rosa's neighborhood 2 days later, and this time his composed authority carried a weight of genuine urgency that unsettled her more than his gratitude had. "I need to speak with you about something important," he said, standing carefully outside her apartment door, having apparently learned her address through channels she hadn't offered directly. "May I come in briefly?" Rosa hesitated, torn between wariness and curiosity. "My father's resting. We need to be quiet." "I understand completely," Enzo said. She let him in, and his careful, controlled demeanor shifted the moment the door closed behind them. "I have reason to believe your apartment building may be under surveillance," he said quietly. "Connected to whoever ordered the shooting at the hotel." Rosa's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means the men who attacked me at the loading dock may have identified you as a witness worth eliminating," Enzo said. "You shielded me during the attack. If they realize you can identify anything about that night, a face, a vehicle, anything at all, that makes you a liability to whoever ordered it." "I didn't see anything," Rosa said, afraid of cutting sharp through her exhaustion. "I grabbed you and hid. I wasn't looking at the shooters." "They may not know that," Enzo said grimly. "And I'm not willing to assume you're safe based on an assumption neither of us can verify." Rosa studied him, weighing genuine fear against her fierce, protective focus on her father's fragile recovery. "I can't leave," she said. "My father just had major surgery. He can't be alone and he can't be moved without real risk to his healing." "I'm not asking you to leave him," Enzo said. "I'm asking you to let me arrange protection for both of you. Discreet, careful, without disrupting his recovery." "Why would you do that?" Rosa asked, genuine confusion cutting through her wariness. "You don't know us." "Because you risked your life for a stranger without a moment's hesitation," Enzo said. "I don't take that lightly. And because if something happened to you or your father as a consequence of protecting me, I don't think I could live with that." Rosa considered his careful, direct honesty, something in it landing differently than she expected from a man whose reputation, she was beginning to understand, extended considerably beyond generous hotel tips. "Who are you actually?" she asked. "People don't scatter in fear from an ordinary hotel guest." "My family has shipping and logistics interests across the city," Enzo said carefully. "Also, other interests, older ones connected to a name that carries weight in New Orleans if you know enough of the city's history to recognize it." "Mafia," Rosa said flatly, though the word carried less shock than resigned understanding. She'd suspected as much since the scattered security details' panicked reaction that first night. "That's the word people use," Enzo said, not denying it. Every rational instinct told Rosa to refuse his protection outright, to retreat fully into the careful, exhausting independence she'd maintained since her mother's death. But something in his direct, unhurried honesty, offered without excuse, without minimizing what it meant, kept her weighing the offer seriously. "If I accept protection," she said slowly, "it doesn't disrupt my father's recovery. No strangers hovering where he can see them. No explanation to him about who you actually are, not yet, not while he's still this fragile." "Agreed completely," Enzo said without hesitation. "Whatever terms protect his recovery." Rosa studied him a moment longer. "Why does this matter so much to you?" "I'm genuinely asking. Most people with your resources would probably send money and consider their debt paid." Enzo was quiet for a moment, something shifting behind his composed exterior. "I had a river years ago," he said finally. "Marcus. He shielded me during an ambush much like what happened at the hotel, using his own body exactly the way you did. He didn't survive it." His voice went quieter. "I've spent years since then believing that kind of selfless protection was rare enough that I'd likely never see it again. Watching you do exactly what he did for a stranger without a moment's hesitation, it's not something I can simply thank you for and walk away from." Rosa absorbed the weight of that admission, something in her chest tightening with unexpected empathy. "I'm sorry about your driver." "Thank you," Enzo said simply. "I don't often talk about him." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock from her father's bedroom door. The older man, awake and curious, calling out weakly to ask who'd come to visit. "I need to go to him," Rosa said. "Of course," Enzo said. "I'll arrange the security discreetly starting tonight. You won't need to explain anything to him unless you choose to." He left quietly, and Rosa stood in her small apartment, understanding with sudden, uneasy clarity that whatever fragile, careful stability she'd built for herself and her father was about to become entangled with considerably more danger than either of them had ever faced. Enzo's discreet protection settled around Rosa's building over the following days. Unmarked vehicles, careful surveillance, security that stayed invisible enough that her father never once questioned the sudden, subtle changes to their neighborhood's rhythm. Enzo himself visited regularly, always brief, always careful to check on her father's recovery with genuine, unhurried attention rather than performative concern. Rosa found herself, despite her wariness, increasingly unable to dismiss the growing warmth of his presence in their small apartment. "He asks about you," her father said one afternoon, after Enzo had left following a visit focused entirely on checking the older man's healing progress. "The gentleman who keeps stopping by. Who is he exactly?" "A friend," Rosa said carefully, unwilling yet to explain the full, complicated truth. "Someone I helped once. He's just being kind." Her father studied her with the particular, knowing attention of a parent who suspected more than his daughter was telling him, but let the explanation stand without pressing further. The external consequence of Enzo's growing involvement arrived within the week. His cousin Angela, who managed the family's legitimate shipping operations, confronted him directly, visible unease in her expression. "People are asking why you're personally overseeing security for a hotel housekeeper," Angela said. "It's drawing attention, Enzo. If whoever ordered the shooting realizes how much weight you're putting behind protecting her, it makes her considerably more of a target than a simple witness would already be." "I'm aware of that risk," Enzo said. "I'm not willing to leave her unprotected because addressing it draws attention." The danger sharpened considerably faster than either Enzo or Rosa anticipated. Returning from a hospital follow-up appointment with her father, Rosa noticed a car idling near their building, positioned with a stillness that felt entirely deliberate. the same unsettling wrongness she'd learned over the past week, to recognize as genuine threat rather than coincidence. She called Enzo immediately, adrenaline cutting through her exhaustion. "There's a car outside our building. I don't recognize it and it's been sitting there too long to be innocent." Enzo's response was instant, sharp with alarm. "Get your father inside away from windows. I'm sending additional security now." Within 20 minutes, Enzo's men confirmed the vehicle had fled before they arrived, but the confirmation of genuine active surveillance settled any remaining doubt about the danger's continued reality. "They're watching us," Rosa said when Enzo arrived personally shortly after, her composure fraying at the edges of real fear. "My father's home. Vulnerable. Recovering from major surgery. And now someone's watching our building." "I know," Enzo said, genuine regret unmistakable in his voice. "I want to move you both somewhere I can actually protect properly. My own estate has the security and the space to keep your father comfortable during his continued recovery." Rosa's instinctive independence warred visibly with real, immediate fear for her father's safety. "I don't want to disrupt his recovery by uprooting him." "I understand that concern completely," Enzo said. "I can arrange for his doctors to continue treating him, transportation for any appointments, everything exactly as it currently runs, just from a location I can actually secure properly." Rosa considered the offer, weighing genuine fear against her fierce reluctance to accept help that felt uncomfortably, like surrendering the careful independence she'd maintained since her mother's death. "If we do this," she said finally, "it's on my terms. I keep working my shifts at the hotel. My father's care stays exactly as it currently is, just relocated. This isn't permission for you to manage our lives beyond what's actually necessary for safety." "Agreed," Enzo said without hesitation. "Whatever you need." She helped her father pack a careful, minimal bag that evening, explaining gently without full detail that a friend had offered them safer accommodations while some unspecified danger was investigated. Her father, still weak from surgery, accepted the explanation with more trust than Rosa felt she deserved, given how much she was still withholding. They arrived at Enzo's estate that night. Her father settled comfortably into a guest suite designed with careful attention to his mobility needs, and Rosa stood in the unfamiliar hallway afterward, her mother's street Christopher medal cool in her palm where she'd been turning it over throughout the tense drive. "Thank you for making this easier for him," she told Enzo quietly, once her father was settled and resting. "He deserves comfort during his recovery regardless of anything else happening around it," Enzo said. "That's not a favor to you. It's simply the right thing to do." Rosa studied him, something in his quiet, unshowy consideration for her father's dignity landing with more weight than any grand gesture could have. Whatever came next, there was no simple path back to their careful, ordinary life anymore. The estate, over the following days, became less a temporary refuge and more a strange, complicated space where Rosa found herself navigating both genuine gratitude and a growing, unsettled awareness of Enzo's careful, consistent presence. Scene 1 came the next morning, practical and immediate. Rosa found Enzo's aging mother, Isabella, struggling with her own medication schedule at the breakfast table, her hands trembling slightly with the particular frustration of someone unused to needing help with something she'd always managed independently. "Let me help," Rosa said, settling in beside her without being asked, her own experience managing her father's post-surgical medications surfacing instinctively. "You don't need to trouble yourself," Isabella said, though her relief at the offer was visible. "It's not trouble," Rosa said, sorting the pills into their proper morning and evening groupings with practiced efficiency. "I've been doing this for my own father for 2 months now. I understand how confusing these schedules get." By the time she finished, Isabella was watching her with quiet, genuine warmth. "Enzo didn't tell me you had this kind of skill," she said. "He doesn't know most things about me yet," Rosa said, surprised by how easily the words came. Scene 2 arrived 3 days later, an argument sharper than either expected. Enzo announced, over a quiet dinner, that he wanted to arrange for Rosa's hotel shifts to be covered entirely by other staff while the investigation into the shooting continued. "Absolutely not," Rosa said immediately. "I agreed to stay here for safety. I did not agree to lose my job over this." "Rosa, if whoever's responsible realizes you're still working at the exact location where the shooting happened, then increase security around my shifts specifically, But you don't get to take away my job because you're worried, she said, voice rising with genuine frustration. That job is how I've supported my father through this entire recovery. I am not going to let fear take that away, not even temporarily. Enzo sat back, absorbing the force of it, and for the first time actually paused instead of immediately defending his position. You're right, he said finally. Tell me what would actually work instead. Rosa's anger softened at the honesty. Increase security around my shifts. Don't take them away. Done, Enzo said, meaning it. Scene 3 came on the 7th night, when Rosa found him alone on the estate's back terrace. A glass of scotch he wasn't drinking held loosely in one hand. Marcus had a family, Enzo said before she'd even asked what was on his mind. A wife, 2 young kids. I've made sure they're taken care of financially in the years since, but money doesn't actually replace what they lost. I think about that every single day, that his selfless protection cost his own family everything, while I walked away essentially unscathed. His voice went quiet. Watching you shield me the same way, watching you risk exactly what Marcus risked for a complete stranger, it terrifies me more than it should, given that you actually survived it. Rosa sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. That's not a small thing to carry. I've spent years since Marcus's death being careful about who I let close to me, Enzo admitted. Convincing myself that emotional distance was the responsible choice, given what closeness apparently costs the people around me. And then you threw yourself over me without hesitation, a complete stranger, and I don't know how to reconcile that with the careful distance I've maintained for years. I didn't do it because I expected anything from you, Rosa said quietly. I did it because gunfire erupted and you were the nearest person. That's the whole explanation. I think you're looking for something more complicated than what actually happened. Maybe, Enzo said. Or maybe the simplicity of it is exactly what makes it remarkable. You didn't calculate anything. You just acted. That's how I've lived most of my life, Rosa said. My mother died when I was 19. My father's been recovering from surgery for 2 months. I don't have the luxury of calculating every decision carefully. Sometimes you just act because hesitating costs more than acting ever does. He looked at her, something raw and unguarded moving across his face. You keep finding exactly the thing I need to hear. I've had a lot of practice with hard things, Rosa said simply. They sat in silence that wasn't uncomfortable, the estate's grounds quiet around them, and something passed between them that wasn't yet spoken but was undeniably present. 2 people who'd both learned, through different kinds of loss, exactly how much courage genuine protection actually required. It was Marco, Enzo's head of security, who broke the moment, appearing at the terrace door, tablet in hand, expression tight. Enzo, he said. We just received word. There's been a second attempt. A car matching the earlier surveillance vehicle tried to run one of our men off the road near the hotel 20 minutes ago. He's all right, but it confirms this isn't finished. Enzo's posture went rigid. Do we have anything on who's responsible? Not conclusively, Marco said. But the pattern matches organized retaliation, not random violence. Someone's escalating deliberately. Rosa felt a cold, sinking dread settle into her chest, understanding with sudden clarity that whatever fragile calm they'd built over the past week was about to be tested considerably more severely than either of them had yet faced. 3 nights later, the second, more calculated attempt came directly at the estate itself. Gunfire erupting from the tree line bordering the property's edge. Enzo's security responding with practiced, controlled efficiency that neutralized the threat within minutes. In the chaos afterward, Rosa found herself replaying the sound of the shooters' voices, shouted commands and hurried retreat, something snagging in her memory with sudden, startling clarity. That voice, she said, finding Enzo in the aftermath, adrenaline still sharp in her veins. One of the shooters. I recognize it. I heard the same voice giving orders during the alley shooting at the hotel. Enzo went very still. You're certain? I'm certain, Rosa said. The same specific cadence, the same phrase, move to position. I remember it clearly from both nights. The following morning, exhausted but alive, both attempts on his life now connected through Rosa's own careful memory, Enzo found her in the estate's kitchen before dawn, and asked her the question that would change everything between them permanently. Marry me, he said, quiet and direct, no elaborate preparation, no performance. just the raw, unguarded honesty of a man who'd nearly lost everything twice in 1 week and understood, with sudden clarity, exactly what mattered most. Rosa stared at him, stunned into complete silence. "I need you to understand this isn't a rescue," Enzo said, watching her stunned silence carefully. "I'm not asking because you're in danger, or because I feel some obligation after everything that's happened. I'm asking because 2 attempts on my life in 1 week have made me understand with total clarity exactly what I actually value. You shielded me without hesitation, asked for nothing in return, and taught me more about genuine protection in 1 week than I've understood in years of running this family's operations. That's an enormous thing to ask the morning after a shooting," Rosa said, still absorbing the shock of it. "I need time. This isn't a decision I can make in a single conversation." "I understand completely," Enzo said with no pressure in his voice. "Take whatever time you need. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I needed you to know how I felt honestly without waiting for some more convenient moment." Rosa studied him, weighing the enormity of the question against everything she'd witnessed over the past week. His careful consideration for her father's dignity, his willingness to change course the moment she pushed back, the raw honesty of his grief over Marcus. "I need to focus on what actually matters right now," she said finally. "Finding out who's trying to kill you. We can talk about everything else once that's resolved." "Agreed," Enzo said, something like relief crossing his composed expression at her practical redirection. The investigation moved forward with new urgency, Rosa's identification of the shooter's voice providing Enzo's security team a concrete lead they hadn't previously had. Marco cross-referenced the specific verbal pattern against known associates of rival operations, and within 2 days, a name surfaced that made Enzo's expression go cold and absolute. "Dominic Vitali," Marco said, laying out the evidence. "Runs a competing logistics operation. He's had disputes with our shipping contracts for years, but nothing that ever escalated to violence before now." "What changed?" Enzo asked. "We lost him a major contract renewal 3 months ago," Marco said. "Cost him considerably more than routine business friction usually would. This might be retaliation that's finally boiled over into something considerably more dangerous." Rosa, reviewing delivery logs from her hotel shifts at Marco's request, cross-referencing timing and vehicle patterns she'd noticed during her regular work, found something that made her stomach drop. "This delivery schedule," she said, pointing to a specific entry. "It matches a vehicle I remember seeing repeatedly near the hotel's loading dock in the weeks before the shooting. I noticed it because it didn't match any of our regular vendors, but I never thought to report it as suspicious. It was just an unfamiliar delivery truck." Marco studied the timing against Vitali's known operational patterns. This confirms he was surveilling the hotel directly well before the first attack. This wasn't opportunistic. It was planned. The danger sharpened considerably once Vitali, apparently realizing through his own channels that Rosa's memory had connected him definitively to both attacks, escalated his response. Rosa received an anonymous, chilling message on her phone. "You remember too much. That's not going to end well for you." She showed it to Enzo immediately, hands shaking despite her effort at composure. "He knows I can identify him. Then we move faster than he expects," Enzo said, voice going cold and absolute. "I want this resolved through legitimate legal channels, evidence strong enough to guarantee real consequences, not something that just drives him further underground." "That's not usually how disputes like this get resolved in your world," Rosa said carefully. "No," Enzo admitted. "But I'm not interested in continuing a cycle of retaliation that puts you and my mother in danger indefinitely. I want this to actually end permanently, through evidence solid enough that Vitali can't simply resurface again in 6 months with another attempt." 2 days later, returning briefly to the Ashford Hotel to collect her final paycheck and formally resign from a position she could no longer safely continue, Rosa found herself cornered near the loading dock, the exact location where everything had started, by a man she recognized instantly from Marco's surveillance photos. "Dominic Vitali. You've caused me a considerable amount of trouble," he said, his voice carrying the exact cadence Rosa had identified from both shootings. "A hotel housekeeper who remembers too much. Enzo's people already have everything they need," Rosa said, backing carefully toward the loading dock's exit, calculating distance the same way she'd learned to calculate danger throughout the past exhausting week. Whatever happens to me now doesn't erase what's already been connected. Maybe not, Vitaly said, closing the distance. But it removes the one witness who could testify to hearing my voice directly. Rosa's pulse hammered, but her protective instincts, the same instincts that had thrown her over Enzo's body without hesitation, kept her voice steadier than she felt. You're not thinking clearly. If something happens to me now, right after your surveillance patterns were already connected to the attacks, that makes you look considerably guiltier, not less. Something in Vitaly's expression flickered, genuine calculation warring with cornered panic. Before he could respond, Enzo's security, alerted moments earlier by a check-in call Rosa had made from the hotel entrance out of careful habit, closed the distance and restrained Vitaly before he could act further. In the sudden, ringing quiet afterward, Enzo arrived personally, checking Rosa carefully, his composed authority cracking into raw, visible relief. Are you hurt? Rosa, look at me. I'm okay, she managed, hands finally shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. We're okay. Vitaly's capture provided Enzo's investigators the final confirmation they needed. His own panicked admission during the confrontation, combined with the surveillance timeline Rosa had helped establish through her careful memory of hotel delivery patterns, created an evidentiary chain solid enough to guarantee real, lasting consequences. But the deeper reckoning, the one that would cost Enzo considerably more than Vitaly's arrest alone, emerged once his own accountants traced the full scope of how Vitaly had operated undetected for months. He's been using our supply partnership with Ferraro Logistics as cover, Marco explained, laying documentation across Enzo's desk. A legitimate business relationship your family's maintained for 6 years, providing exactly the kind of operational blind spot that let Vitaly's surveillance go unnoticed for months. Ferraro knew, Enzo said, understanding settling cold and absolute. Or should have known. Either way, the partnership enabled this. Severing that relationship costs us a major contract, Marco warned. Years of steady revenue, gone if you formally end it. Then we lose it, Enzo said, the finality in his voice settling the matter completely. I'm not interested in maintaining a partnership that let a man surveil my own family for months, regardless of whether Ferraro's involvement was deliberate complicity or simple negligence. Either way, it's a vulnerability I won't continue accepting. It was, Rosa would understand later, the single most costly decision Enzo made throughout the entire ordeal. Not the confrontation with Vitaly directly, but the deliberate, complete severing of a 6-year business partnership specifically to ensure no similar vulnerability could ever again put his family at risk. He formally ended the Ferraro partnership within the week, absorbing the significant financial loss without complaint, while simultaneously providing investigators with the full evidentiary trail connecting Vitaly to both attacks. The surveillance patterns, Rosa's voice identification, the financial motive tied to the lost contract renewal months earlier. Vitaly's formal arrest and prosecution moved forward through legitimate channels exactly as Enzo had insisted. Rosa's detailed, precise testimony about the delivery logs and voice identification providing prosecutors evidence strong enough to guarantee serious, lasting charges. You didn't have to sacrifice an entire business partnership to get this resolved properly, Rosa told him, finding him in his office 3 days after the Ferraro severance, exhausted in a way she hadn't seen from him before. I did actually, Enzo said. The partnership was the exact vulnerability that let this happen in the first place. I can't ask you to trust that this won't happen again if I'm not willing to close the vulnerability that enabled it. That's a significant loss, Rosa said quietly. It's the only choice I could actually live with, Enzo said. For years I told myself that maintaining steady, profitable business relationships mattered more than examining whether those relationships carried hidden risk. Watching you get cornered at that loading dock, watching Vitaly nearly succeed at silencing you, that taught me something I should have understood a long time ago. He met her eyes directly. True protection isn't about grand gestures or declarations. It's about the unglamorous, difficult work of actually closing the vulnerabilities that put the people you care about at risk, even when that costs you something real. Rosa was quiet a long moment, weighing everything he'd admitted against the proposal still hanging unanswered between them since that first exhausted morning. I still haven't given you an answer, she said finally. About marrying you. I know, Enzo said. I meant what I said. I'm not pressuring you toward a decision. I've had time to think about it, Rosa said. About everything, Your proposal, everything you sacrificed to actually resolve this properly instead of just making it disappear quietly. I need you to understand something though before I answer. What's that? I'm not agreeing to this as someone who was rescued, Rosa said, echoing something she'd been turning over throughout the past difficult week. If I say yes, it's not because you protected me or because you sacrificed something significant to fix this. It's because I've watched you listen genuinely, every time I pushed back on how you wanted to handle things. That's rarer than grand gestures and it matters more to me. That's exactly how I want you to decide, Enzo said, something raw and hopeful in his careful composure. Rosa reached into her pocket, fingers finding her mother's Street Christopher medal, turning it over once before meeting Enzo's eyes directly. Yes, she said simply. I'll marry you. Not because you asked the morning after nearly dying twice in 1 week, and not because you sacrificed a business partnership to protect me properly. Because somewhere in this exhausting, terrifying week, I found someone who actually listens, and that's worth building something real with. The formal resolution of Vitali's case concluded within the month, his conviction secured through evidence solid enough that no amount of legal maneuvering could unravel it. The surveillance timeline, Rosa's precise voice identification, the financial motive, all combining into an undeniable case. You gave up a significant partnership for this, Rosa said, sitting with Enzo in the estate's garden, her father resting comfortably nearby, fully recovered now from his surgery. I gave up exactly what needed to go, Enzo said. Every day since I understand more clearly why it mattered. Marcus died because I trusted a security arrangement that had a blind spot nobody bothered examining closely enough. I wasn't going to let history repeat itself because I valued steady revenue over genuine safety. 2 months later, Rosa's father had fully recovered from his surgery, settled comfortably back into their original apartment. Though Rosa herself split her time increasingly between that familiar home and Enzo's estate, the wedding still months away but the partnership between them already settling into something steady and genuinely equal. Enzo had offered her more than once complete financial security, an end to any need for her to work at all, comfort that would let her focus entirely on her father's continued well-being and whatever future she wanted to build. She turned down the full extent of it every time, gently but firmly, exactly as she'd promised herself she would. You don't have to keep working, he said one evening, finding her reviewing potential part-time positions at a smaller, family-run hotel near her old neighborhood. You've more than earned the ability to simply rest. I know, Rosa said. But I want to keep some version of the work that's mine. Not the exhausting double shifts I used to manage out of necessity. I don't need that anymore and I'm grateful for that. But something that's actually built by me on my own terms, not just handed to me because you can afford to hand it to me. Then what do you want? I want to help manage this smaller hotel's housekeeping operations, Rosa said. Real responsibility, not just a paycheck. Something I actually build alongside everything else we're building together. Those are good terms, Enzo said, something warm moving behind his careful expression. I'll support that completely. That evening, sitting together on the estate's terrace where he'd first proposed, Rosa pulled her mother's Street Christopher medal from her pocket, turning it over in her hands. She used to say this medal protected travelers, Rosa said. People moving through uncertain territory away from the safety of home. I used to think that meant physical travel. I think I understand now it meant something broader. Protection for anyone stepping into genuine uncertainty, trusting they'd find their way through it. That's what this entire year has been, Enzo said quietly. Uncertain territory for both of us. I think we found our way through it, Rosa said, something settled and certain in her voice. Enzo reached for her hand, deliberate and unhurried, entirely hers to hold or release. I know my proposal came fast, he said. The morning after everything happened, before either of us had fully processed what we'd survived. I've wondered since then whether that timing made it feel less real to you, less considered. It felt considered in the way that actually matters, Rosa said. You didn't propose because you were grateful or because the danger made you sentimental. You proposed because one impossible week showed you exactly who I was, without any performance or calculation on either of our parts. That's not too fast. That's just honest. I love you, Enzo said simply, the words carrying the same unguarded directness as his proposal weeks earlier. Not because you saved my life. Because of who you are underneath that, steady, protective, honest in a world that rarely rewards honesty. I love you too, Rosa said, and closed the distance between them herself, kissing him with the same unhesitating certainty that had once sent her diving in front of gunfire for a stranger she barely knew. Rosa still carries her mother's Street Christopher medal every single day, still believes more firmly now than ever that true protection isn't proven through grand declarations or elaborate gestures. It's proven in the unglamorous, immediate moment of selfless action, and in everything that follows, built honestly on equal footing by two people who actually choose each other rather than simply needing each other. If this story stayed with you, I want to know what you think. Was Enzo's proposal the morning after too soon to mean anything real, or had that single impossible night already told him everything he needed to know? Tell me your honest answer in the comments and why you believe it. If stories about love proven through action rather than words resonate with you, subscribe. The next one is coming soon.